My name is Ruth Callahan, and I'm 78 years old. I live in a small town just outside Eugene, Oregon, where the rain never seems to stop and the air always smells like wet cedar and old secrets. People around here know me as the quiet widow who tends her roses and waves at the mailman, but they don't know my story. I've carried this truth for more than 60 years, like a rock in my chest that never dissolved, no matter how much time passed. I guess that's why I'm finally talking about it now. Maybe someone out there needs to hear it. So if you're still listening, please don't scroll away, child. Just stay a little longer. When I was 8 years old, my daddy died in a sawmill accident. That was 1955. The same week the church bells stopped ringing. The same week Mama stopped smiling. Daddy had been our backbone, a soft-spoken man with hands rough from work and a whistle that filled our mornings like birdsong. When he was gone, everything in that house changed. The light left the rooms. And my 4 brothers, Thomas, Earl, Benny and Luke, filled that empty space with something darker. We lived on Mill Creek Road, in a weather-beaten farmhouse surrounded by pine trees so tall they blocked out the sky. In the evenings, fog would roll in from the valley and make everything look like a ghost story. Mama used to sit by the window, staring out at that fog, holding her teacup even after it went cold. She said she was praying. I knew better. She was remembering. At first, my brothers acted like they were taking care of us, chopping wood, fixing the roof, helping Mama with the fields. But soon their tempers started to show. They were angry at the world, angry at losing Daddy, angry that they had to grow up too fast. And they took that anger out on us. I was too young to understand words like abuse. All I knew was that if I heard their boots on the porch after dark, I had to pretend to be asleep. I'd press my face into the pillow, heart racing, praying to a God who stayed silent. Mama tried to stand up to them once. Just once. It was a cold November night. She told Earl to stop yelling at me, and he slapped her so hard she fell into the stove. The burn on her arm never healed right. After that, she stopped speaking against them. We lived by quiet rules. Keep your eyes down, keep your mouth shut, and never ever talk back. Sometimes, I'd sneak out behind the barn just to breathe. The smell of damp hay and the sound of crickets were the only things that reminded me life could be gentle. I used to imagine Daddy was still out there somewhere, watching over us through the trees. By the time I turned 16, my brothers had turned into men. Rough, bitter men who drank too much and worked too little. They'd sit around the kitchen table playing cards, the air thick with cigarette smoke, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. I remember one night when Luke, the youngest of them, looked at me and said, "You think you're better than us, Ruthie? You ain't better than nobody." I wanted to scream that I was different. But I didn't. I just walked away, my face burning, because I'd learned long ago that words only made things worse. If you've ever been afraid in your own home, you know how it changes you. It teaches you to move quietly, to read the room before you enter it. You learn the rhythm of danger, the way a man's breath sounds when he's about to explode, the way silence can mean safety or storm. That kind of fear becomes part of your bones. There were good days too, of course. Oregon summers could be kind, the air smelling of wild berries and rain-soaked soil, the sky stretching open like forgiveness. I'd sit under the big oak behind the house and write little poems in a notebook Daddy gave me. I kept that notebook hidden under a loose floorboard. It was my secret world, a place where their words couldn't reach me. But secrets have a way of surfacing. One day, Benny found it. He read my poems out loud to the others, mocking every line, laughing until tears rolled down his cheeks. That was the night I decided I'd never forgive them. You see, revenge doesn't always come as fire and fury. Sometimes it starts as a seed, small, quiet, but determined. I didn't know how or when, but I knew I'd find a way to make them pay. I left home at 18. I told Mama I was going to work at the diner in town. She just nodded. Her eyes were tired, her voice barely above a whisper. "Go," she said, "before they take everything from you too." I never forgot the way she looked that day. Frail, beaten, but still holding on to something sacred inside her. That was the last time I saw her alive. 2 years later, I got a letter from the county office. Your mother, Mary Callahan, passed away from illness. That's all it said. No funeral invitation, no details. My brothers didn't even tell me. I cried that night until my throat went raw. But when the tears stopped, something inside me hardened. I realized the only thing left for me in that town was vengeance. Now, if you're still here listening to an old woman ramble, thank you. Please, don't forget to like this video. Not for me, but for anyone out there who's been silenced. Because what I'm about to tell you next, that's when everything changed. That's when I stopped being afraid. That's when I became the woman who took everything they ever cared about and turned it to dust. When I tell you I came back for revenge, I don't mean I stormed in with a shotgun and a list. That's the sort of ragged picture the movies sell. My revenge was colder than that. It was patient as the moss that grows on old stone. It took me years to learn how to unpick a life the way they'd unpicked ours, stitch by stitch, secret by secret. And I confess now I took a small, terrible comfort in doing it well. After Mama died and the county letter arrived like a final, polite dismissal, I drifted. I worked in kitchens, washed floors, learned how to set a typewriter just so. I married for a while, had 2 children, left for my own reasons and then found the courage to stand alone. I learned to keep accounts, to remember names and dates, to write so clearly that no one could claim they hadn't understood. Those skills would be the tools I brought back. It was late summer when I first drove down Mill Creek Road again. Years had softened the ridges of my memory, but the house was the same crooked thing, a silhouette against the sky, smoke from a neighbor's chimney chasing the gulls like a bad scent. My hands trembled on the steering wheel not from fear but from a strange, awful excitement. The town hardly noticed me. People in small places are busy keeping their own lives tidy. But that wasn't my intention. I wasn't there to blend in. I was there to remember, to collect, to set in motion the reckoning. My brothers had positions in that town. Thomas ran the lumber yard. People trusted him because he could balance a ledger like it was scripture. Earl had a pickup and the habit of fixing things for farmers, and the kind of friends who looked the other way when chickens disappeared or a barn door went missing. Benny tended the feed store. He smiled at women in the diner like he had nothing to hide. Luke, the youngest, had been a teacher for a while, though folks whispered he left town the year his nose started to drink more than his coffee. I learned their rhythms. I went to the post office and listened to the way men said each other's names. I worked at the library for a season and learned how the town read itself. Who took the paper, who liked the sports, who scanned the obituaries with the same dull, hungry glance. I started small. I mended fences for an old neighbor who'd once had dealings with Thomas. I left my business card in the dentist's office. I let myself be seen as Ruth Callahan, a woman who'd returned to care for her aging aunt, a fiction, but a useful one. You want the trick. People will protect their own until the yawning truth bangs them in the face. They'll pay more heed to paper than to cry. So I kept paper. I dug. Not literally. Not a body in the yard or anything like that, but I dug into ledgers, into receipts, into letters and promises. I sat with old Mrs. Harrow and listened to her tell me about the time Thomas helped her with a forest claim and the sawmill checks never quite balanced out. I found the note Benny had written to some traveling salesman about a loan he never repaid. I turned up a copy of a deed where Earl had quietly acquired a swath of land under a name my mother used before she married. A small, bitter theft. When you collect enough tiny grievances and crooked transactions, they stack into something heavy. I began to place those small weights where they would do the most damage. I mailed anonymous postcards to the county clerk with photocopies of receipts that didn't match payrolls. I slipped a letter into the pastor's pews suggesting the church might want to review its charity distributions. I handed Mrs. Harrow a typed note with a list of dates and asked her to come with me to the office if she wanted to see justice done. I said please, and she came. She wept when she told her story, and the pastor, a man who liked to think himself blind to scandal, stopped humming hymns and started asking questions. My brothers were clever enough to cover their tracks from each other. They thought loyalty ran thicker than blood, but they were not clever enough for how I would weaponize dignity. I never raised my voice at them in public. I sat in the church with my hands folded and smiled while the rumor threads tugged at people's imaginations. People began to ask. People began to take small steps that turned into investigations. An audit here. A heated meeting at the lodge there. A neighbor who felt cheated on a land swap asked for his day in court. It was all paperwork and polite, mortal panic. There were moments when I nearly lost my nerve. Revenge asks you to become someone a little less soft than you were. I would wake up in motels with my heart like it had been lifted by a fishing line, and remember the girl who had written poems under the floorboard. I'd read one of those old lines and realize I was becoming a different kind of poet, one who wrote in ledgers and subpoenas. Did I regret it? Sometimes. Mostly I felt like a woman walking down a long hallway carrying a lantern, necessary and steady. One afternoon, I walked into the lumberyard and watched Thomas from behind the stacks of planks as he argued with a supplier about lost materials. He had that same easy laugh that made people hand him their trust. I left a letter in his mailbox, not cruel, just plain and filled with facts, and 2 days later, the town accountant came down and asked questions about inventory. Thomas barked and protested, but he'd spent years trusting the arithmetic of friends over the arithmetic of paper. It unspooled him. Earl's pickup was repossessed after a string of complaints that traced back to a back bill he'd thought forgotten. Benny lost a long-time contract when one of his customers remembered the payments that had stopped arriving. Luke was the hardest to pinch. Teachers are guardians in a small town. But even he had habits, late for heaters at a bar when he should have been home, careless words he thought weren't heard. I let a mother of one of his students read a letter I'd typed, gentle and factual, about his absences. She went to the school board. There was an investigation. Luke's reputation, the one thing he prized, began to crack. I confess now. There were nights I stood in my little rented room and thought about Mercy. I thought about the way Mama had held my hand when the fever took her, the way her thumb pressed my palm like a small, stubborn prayer. I thought about the boys who had been my brothers and the boys who had been monsters. Revenge tasted like freedom, but it had a tang of ash in the mouth. Every time a man lost his job, or a ledger was corrected, or a neighbor turned his back, a small part of me grieved who he might have been if Daddy had come home. When the sheriff first knocked on my door with an envelope and a polite, official look, I almost laughed out loud. He had a list of complaints and a stack of signed statements. I watched his face go slack as the paper told a story he'd been too busy to see. Theft, negligence, extortion of elderly farmers in the county. He'd known the Callahans for years. He'd eaten at their table. Now he had a pile of facts and a case he hadn't expected. That was not the moment I crushed them. It was, rather, the moment the town started to crumble neatly around them. Invitations dried up. The lodge refused membership renewals. The bank put holds, appointments, middle managers with clipped pens. People are social creatures. Take away the small daily certainties and they begin to make themselves small, ashamed things. You'll ask me if it felt good. In some ways, yes. There's a clarity in watching a man who lived on other people's fear step down from his pedestal. It felt like justice. But there were nights when the house on Mill Creek Road burned in my dreams and I woke up with my throat full of smoke. It's strange. Vengeance is not just for you. It takes a toll on the soul of the person who metes it out. I lost friends. I found enemies. I watched people I had loved shrink to embarrassed men telling themselves they were wronged by fate. If you're still watching this old woman, please hit like if you believe in truth being told. Subscribe if you want me to go on. There's more to say. I will tell you about the night I walked into the kitchen with a pot of stew and watched the last of their table manners fall away. I will tell you about the confrontation that was not a roaring fight but a careful, surgical closing of doors. And I will tell you why, even though they were ruined, I didn't feel as light as I thought I would. For now, let me sit with the rain and this small victory that tastes of iron. The town will never call my name in the same way again. That's partly the point. I wanted to be invisible until I chose not to be. I wanted the world to learn what silence can do, to wear it like armor and then, finally, to take it off and use it like a blade. The sheriff's visit had scattered my brothers like pigeons from a porch rail. By early autumn, their names were whispered instead of spoken. The town's air felt different, thinner, nervous. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the cafe window and barely recognize the calm in my own eyes. It wasn't a triumph. It was completion. I hadn't expected the silence afterward. It rolled through the valley heavier than fog, the kind that muffles even the frogs by the creek. When a house loses its gossip, it begins to rot from the inside. That's what happened to the old place on Mill Creek Road. Thomas wrote to me first. A letter, short and smudged, asking me to come talk sense to the family before the bank took everything. He called me Ruthie again, like we were children. Maybe he thought nostalgia would soften me. It didn't. But I went. The drive felt like traveling backward through time, past the sawmill gate where Daddy used to wave, past the schoolhouse roof where my poems once fluttered away in a storm. The house stood hunched and grey, boards curling like old skin. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and desperate. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Damp wood, cheap whiskey, and defeat. My brothers were there. What was left of them? Thomas at the table with unpaid bills spread like a deck of shame. Earl nursing his bandaged hand. Benny pacing, mumbling about mistakes. Luke is silent in the corner, his eyes glassy from drinking. "Look who came home," Thomas said. His voice was still smooth, but it carried a tremor now. "Come to finish us off?" "No," I said, hanging my coat. "Just to see if any of you remember what being a family felt like." They laughed, brittle and joyless. The sound broke something in me, not anger, just a deep tiredness. For years I dreamed of this moment as a blaze of justice. But standing there, I only saw men hollowed out by their own cruelty. They had punished themselves more thoroughly than I ever could. Mama's chair still sat by the window, the cushion flattened by ghosts. I walked over and touched it. The fabric was frayed, but it held a faint scent of lavender. I closed my eyes and felt her hand on mine, that steady thumb pressing hope into my palm. Thomas spoke again. "You think you're better, Ruth? You destroyed us." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed yourselves. I just stopped cleaning up after you." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the rain ticking against the roof. Earl slammed his fist on the table. "What do you want, then? Apologies? We were kids. We did what we had to." "You did what you wanted," I said. "And you made sure Mama couldn't stop you. I want you to admit that." The room seemed to shrink. Benny sat down hard, his face pale. Luke turned away, whispering something I couldn't catch. Finally, Thomas sighed. His shoulders sagged the way Daddy's used to after a long day at the mill. "I remember the night she tried to stop me," he said. "She looked at me like I was a stranger. I guess I was. There it was, the crack in the wall. I didn't need tears or shouting. Just that small, reluctant truth." I nodded, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "I'm not here for revenge," I told them. "I'm here because carrying your sins has kept me old before my time. I'm done." They stared at me as if I'd spoken another language. Then Luke, always the quiet one, stood. He reached for a dusty bottle on the counter and poured 4 uneven glasses. "To Daddy," he muttered. I didn't drink. But I lifted my empty glass anyway. "To Mama," I said. The words tasted like freedom. That night I slept in my old room. The wallpaper was peeling, the floor cold, but I dreamed for the first time without fear. In the morning, the house was silent. My brothers had gone their separate ways, to courts, to debts, to whatever lonely corners the world would allow them. I walked out to the porch and watched the sunrise bleed through the mist. For the first time since I was 8 years old, the light felt clean. I sold the property a month later. The money wasn't much, but it was enough to start a small flower shop in town. Callahan Blooms, the sign still says. I built it near the church, where the scent of fresh soil mixes with hymns on Sunday mornings. Every spring, I plant a row of lavender out front for Mama. People come in for weddings, funerals, and apologies. They tell me their little heartbreaks and ask for something that lasts. I always smile and hand them a cactus or a pot of rosemary. Nothing truly good grows without resilience, I tell them. They think it's gardening advice. It isn't. Sometimes I see one of my brothers on the far side of the market. We nod, nothing more. That's enough. The past doesn't vanish, but it loosens its grip if you keep moving forward. If you're still listening, thank you for hearing an old woman's truth. I'm not proud of the road I took, but I'm proud that I walked it all the way to the end. If any part of my story helps you lay down your own anger, please leave a little heart or a comment so I know I wasn't just talking to the rain. Next time in the final part, I'll tell you how I learned to forgive. Not them, not really, but myself. Because that was the hardest part of all. You know, folks always think revenge ends a story. That once the bad people fall, the pain just disappears. But they don't tell you about what comes after the storm, the silence, the kind that echoes in your bones. After my brothers' lives crumbled, after I told the truth that burned through our little Oregon town like wildfire, there was no cheer, no applause. Just the hum of a refrigerator, the drip of rain off the eaves, and the sound of my own breathing. I was 62 when I finally stood alone in that farmhouse, looking at the empty chairs that once held monsters and memories. I'd spent half my life surviving, and the other half trying to even the scales. But peace was still a stranger to me. Sometimes I'd sit on that front porch, same boards my daddy built in 1948, and talk to the wind. I did it, Mama, I'd whisper. They can't hurt anyone anymore. But even then, my mother's face wouldn't come to me smiling. It made me tired. Like she was asking, was it worth it, Ruthie? Maybe it's age that makes you softer. Or maybe it's just that time wears down anger the way rivers carve stone. When I turned 70, I started going back through the old letters, the photos, the church bulletins, everything that tied me to that family name I'd once despised. I found a picture of the 5 of us, lined up by the barn, our faces sunburned and proud. My brothers looked like boys again. Before the whiskey, before the fists, before the fear. Just boys. I wept for them. Isn't that something? After everything they did, I still cried for them. That was the first time I realized forgiveness isn't about them. It's about me. About letting go of the weight they put on my shoulders before it buried me completely. Now don't get me wrong, sugar. I didn't call them up, didn't go hug anyone at a family reunion. Forgiveness, for me, was quieter, smaller. It was a choice I made in my own kitchen, over a pot of soup, looking out the window at the Oregon pines. I whispered it into the steam. I forgive you, but you'll never have me again. That was freedom. I think God heard it too. Because the next morning, I woke up to birds singing outside my window. Real birds, not the ones my mind made up to fill the silence. The air smelled of rain and lilacs. For the first time in decades, I felt light. Like maybe I hadn't been living after the story, but just reaching the truest part of it. You see, revenge gave me justice, but forgiveness gave me peace. Sometimes, when I tell this story to folks online like you, I can feel them crying with me. Some even write me messages, sweet young women saying, "Ruth, I went through something like that. How did you survive?" And I tell them, honey, survival isn't the end goal. Healing is. Now here I am, 82 years old, with silver hair and shaking hands, sitting on this old porch one last time. The fields behind me are golden. The air tastes like autumn and closure. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel afraid of remembering. My story isn't about hate anymore. It's about grace. If you're watching this, if you've made it this far, please, don't carry your pain forever. It'll eat you from the inside like rust. Talk about it. Cry about it. Scream it into the wind if you have to. Then, when you're ready, let it go. Because peace doesn't come to the strong. It comes to be honest. For the longest time, I kept this story buried. Like a box under floorboards no one dared to lift. I thought if I never spoke about it, it couldn't hurt me anymore. But silence is a living thing, child. It grows teeth. It eats at you slowly, from the inside out. That's why I'm talking now. Because there comes a moment, maybe when your hands start to shake, or when you wake up one morning and realize you've outlived your fear, when you understand that truth isn't a wound. It's a window. And it lets the light in. I spent decades walking through shadows, building walls around my heart. But I've learned something about time. It doesn't heal everything, no. It teaches you how to live with the scars. How to look at the ache and say, you don't define me anymore. Some nights, I sit out here on this porch, and I swear I can hear the girl I used to be. Barefoot, bruised, still believing the world might love her back someday. I wish I could hold her and whisper, you were right to hope. Because here I am. Still breathing. Still growing old. Still laughing sometimes. And if you're listening, really listening, then maybe the girl inside you still has a chance to be free too. I want you to remember this, sugar. You are not what they did to you. You are what you survived. And surviving, my dear, is sacred work. Maybe that's why I'm telling it now. Not for sympathy. Not for pity. But because secrets are heavy, and I've carried mine long enough. Maybe it's time to set it down. And let the wind take what's left. If my story touched your heart tonight, if it made you cry, or remember, or even just breathe a little deeper, please tap that little heart. Leave me a comment. Let me know you're out there. That my voice didn't just fade into the noise. Because every story deserves to be heard. And every survivor deserves to be seen. My name was Ruth Callahan, once. But maybe it doesn't have to be anymore. Maybe now, I'm just a woman reborn from the silence. And this quiet right here, is my peace. Good night, my darlings. And thank you for listening.